Good afternoon, it's Dave at ATI Watch Reviews. Please hit the like button and please smash that subscribe button for more awesome watch content. Got with me two popular Homage watches from two very popular AliExpress Chinese watch brands. We've got the Steeldive, little wristwatch check. I've got my Belova two-tone Marine Star, absolute beautiful quartz diver, 43mm in that gorgeous matte blue dial. I just love it. But yeah, it's a little comparison review video. So we've got the Steeldive Sd1970 on my left, and this is a 44mm nominal ceramic bezel sapphire crystal fully solid stainless steel bracelet Homage watch with 200-meter water resist versus the Pagani design PD-1696 200-meter water resist sapphire crystal aluminium Pepsi bezel fully solid stainless steel bracelet with deployant clasp with safety catch, and this is also a 200-meter water resist watch. Both watches are Homage watches to a very famous Japanese brand, and they both basically homaging the turtle and different versions of the turtle watch basically. I won't mention the name of the brand, but you all know what I'm talking about. Now let's start with the sizing, because this is a fundamental one, because the sizing is going to massively affect comfort, and the comfort is going to massively affect whether you want to wear the watch, no matter what watch that is basically. And the sizing on both watches is good, but it is superior definitely in my view, at least on a bracelet, on the Steeldive. The Steeldive is only about 46 and a bit mil lug to lug. It's 13.5 mil thick to the top of the crystal, and the bezel diameter is around 41 and a little bit diameter, with the case only being a little bit bigger than that. Now they call it a 44mm watch, but this is not really a 44mm watch. That's if you measure the case basically, and even then it's slightly less. The watch feels more like a 40mm watch in total honesty, or a 41mm watch. That's how, and part of the reason is because of the design of these cases that curve up with the lugs. They have super curved lugs, which is brilliant, and they make them super comfortable to wear. This is in comparison to the Pagani, the PD-1696, that has a bigger lug to lug by around probably a millimeter bigger. It's more like 47.2. It is a bigger in the case dimension. It's just under 45mm, and the whereas the bezel dimension is about 42mm, and the thickness is about 14.2 to the domed crystal. I think for and as well, another sizing issue, or another sizing characteristic to point out, is the lug widths, and we've got 20mm tapering down to 18mm versus 22mm tapering down to 20mm, and all this has an effect on the comfort of the watch. I think for most people you're going to prefer the Steeldive. The Steeldive has superior sizing for comfort, not for wrist presence but for comfort. It definitely feels like a significantly smaller watch than the Pagani. The Pagani feels significantly bigger because the bracelet is bigger and because the head of the watch is ultimately bigger overall. Even though it is comfy still, but I would say the Steeldive on my left is one of the comfiest watches I have ever put, bracelet watches, it's fully solid stainless steel bracelet that I have ever worn. It is a joy to wear basically. You could wear it all day long for 10 hours, no problem. It is super comfortable. The Pagani is heavier as well, so it's bulkier and heavier, so it's not going to be as comfortable. So for sizing, Steeldive wins. We can also talk about a very related, very similar topic of the weight. The weight is going to be, I would guess, about 25-30 grams heavier on the Pagani, which means that, again, it's heavier, less comfortable, so the Steeldive wins for comfort, weight and sizing. Steeldive wins. This may change slightly, or it might not be as magnified, the difference, if you put them on rubber bands. If you put them on rubber bands, I would say they'd both be super comfortable. You'd still give it to Steeldive because it's a smaller watch, but I think it's more magnified because you've got a big fat chunky bracelet on the Pagani that does make it heavier. So let's talk about the crystals. The crystals are both sapphire, but they are both very different. The Steeldive has a kind of flat crystal, which I massively prefer, even though it does protrude. It isn't it isn't flush with the bezel. It is proud of the bezel, which is not something I particularly like, but it is flat. Whereas the Pagani has like what they call a coin dome crystal, which improves the watch's ability to resist pressure, water ingress, and pressure underwater, if you will, but it affects legibility because the Pagani, as you can clearly see now, just by me moving it around, you can clearly see that it is more reflective, and that is because of the curvature of the dome. It picks up reflections more. So for that reason, the winner is the Steeldive on the crystal, in my view. They've also managed to nominally, they state that they're both 200 meter water resist. Now, if it is true that Steeldive have achieved that with a flat crystal, questions would have to be asked of why Pagani couldn't do it with a flat crystal. Why do you need to put a dome crystal on it if you possibly could have achieved it with the 200 meter water resist with a flat crystal? Again, I don't know the answer, but ultimately, I prefer a flat crystal, definitely, personally. So the winner goes to Steeldive for that. Dials. I actually do prefer the dial of the Pagani. It is more in my personal style of the presentation of watch dials. The Steeldive logo is a little bit childish, although I think it does work for them on these dive watches, on these sports watches. I think Pagani's looks more professional. I think it's a cleaner dial. I think the chapter ring is overly done on the Steeldive. I think it is ultimately a superior presentation on the Pagani. So in my view, it is a better dial on the Pagani. I also like the sword hands. I like the handset on the Pagani compared to the Steeldive. I prefer the date window on the Pagani as well. It is a bigger dial though, so it's more legible in that sense. I can read the writing better because they've got bigger writing, but the presentation, I believe, is slightly better on the Pagani, so I'm going to give the Pagani the winner for that. Even though Steeldive does use what I would class as, it's more of a piano black dial, whereas the Pagani is more of a very dark grey, which I would have preferred it if they put piano black on it. I think the contrast would have been superior. Bezels. The bezel on the Steeldive is ceramic, which I strongly prefer over aluminium, but it is super difficult, or it can be quite difficult to turn. Maybe you'd want that when you're diving. This is contrasted with the Pagani's aluminium bezel, which feels much lighter and much easier to turn. Quality-wise, I would prefer the Steeldive's ceramic, definitely, but it is that difficult to turn. I kind of prefer the ease of use of the Pagani one, but because the materials are ultimately what matter to me strongly on the bezel, I'm going to give the winner because ultimately I don't dive with it, and I think divers would prefer a more difficult bezel to turn than a super easy one for safety reasons underwater. So I'm going to give the winner to the Steeldive. I've covered the case already. They both do a great job of homaging the case design of the original, that is obviously not been designed by Steeldive or Pagani. The case design is outstanding, and the case, you know, the way they've managed to homage it is brilliant. They are both very comfortable cases with massively curved flanks, and they're both polished to a decent degree. The Paganis and Steeldives actually have a coarse polishing on the brush satin areas. The Steeldives is maybe a little bit less coarse than the Pagani, so I think the polishing is probably slightly superior, at least on the case, on the Steeldive. But the case designs, or the case, I'm going to give it a draw because they've both done an excellent job. Now the movements, the movements are both basically NH. One's an NH36 and one's an NH35, which is a Steeldive. They're both similar for accuracy. Obviously, you get an additional complication there on the Paganis. I'm gonna give the movement. I mean, ultimately, you're getting more information on the Paganis. I'm gonna give the movement winner to Pagani for using the NH36. Bracelet, well, case backs, I would have loved to have seen an exhibition window, but they both just have a stainless steel etched case back that is easier to achieve the water resistance than using you know, some type of crystal on the back. I'm going to give the case back a draw because they both have very similar information. Now let's talk about the bracelets. The bracelets are both good. The Steeldive has a less complicated, just brushed, polished, and obviously I've scratched it up because I've been using it so much. With the flanks are polished, good. They just have a pin system. There's no collar, it's just a pin system. They have the arrows for which way you can take it out. And it has a cheap pressed metal deployant clasp with safety catch on the Steeldive, which is quite similar, although it is quite bigger on the Pagani. It is a bigger clasp. It is wider, obviously, and it is longer. But the swing arms are thicker. It's slightly superior. You get the same number of micro adjusts on both, only 3, but they've used slightly better materials on the Pagani. The bracelet on the Pagani is slightly more complicated. It has the outer flanks, if you will, polished with an inner brushed. And again, it uses pins without collars. It just uses a pin system. Very easy to resize. For comfort, I've already explained this, but for comfort, the Steeldive bracelet is comfier. There is just no question about that. But it's a bigger watch on the Pagani. The bracelet is arguably, in terms of craftsmanship, it's arguably very, very slightly better on the Pagani because of the clasp. The clasp is slightly better. But, so I'll give it just a tiny, and they've got a more intricate bracelet design than just brushed, although a part of me thinks that doing this just brushed on the Pagani would be just as nice, really. But it has an additional complication there. So I'll give the winner slightly to Pagani, but for comfort, the winner is obviously to Steeldive because the sizing of the bracelet is superior. It is. Whether it would be appropriate to put a 20mm lug width on the Pagani, I don't know. It wouldn't be as balanced. It might make the watch head feel too top heavy, but it is a bigger watch and it adds more weight having it 22 to 20 instead of 20 to 18. Lume. Now, I've checked the lume on both of these. They both have very good lume, but the Pagani's also has the bezel luminated. So I'm going to give the winner, and it also has excellent lume. This has really good lume as well, the Steeldive. But I'm going to give the winner ever so slightly to Pagani. So overall, it's a kind of horses for courses one. Do you want the lumed bezel? Do you want the Pepsi appearance? Because if you do, the Pagani is better. Do you want a bigger watch that's 45mm versus 44mm? Even though really, I would say that really you're talking about a 44mm watch or a 45mm watch versus a 42mm watch or a 41mm watch. This is fairly significantly smaller, really. So I think if you've got 7" and above, I think you can pull off, or 6.5 and above, you can pull off the Pagani. If not, go with the Steeldive. The Steeldive's a great choice anyway, because of how cheap it is. They're both actually priced very similar. They're both probably about 85-90 quid when you chuck in the VAT and everything. So they're both priced very similar actually. I mean, it's a tough one, but for legibility, even though the dial would be easier to read because Pagani have put a domed crystal on there, the reflections annoy me a bit, and I like the kind of simplicity of the Steeldive and the legibility. I do, even though the hands are a little bit boring on the Steeldive. So again, it's horses for courses. I think overall, which one would I prefer if I had to pick? I think I would actually pick the Steeldive, because I was just so satisfied with it. It just did everything to a really good degree. But it's a close one. For comfort as well, definitely Steeldive. So I'll give the overall winner slightly to the Steeldive, even though it has an inferior clasp. And I would argue the dial does look better on the Pagani. And if you want Pepsi, then definitely the Pagani. So anyway, that's just my little comparison review of both watches. They're both a great choice for under 100 GBP. They're not a bad choice at all. Great weekend or desk diver. Would you actually go diving with either of them? Scuba diving, down to like 15-meter depth or whatever. Would you do it with both of them? I'm sure you could do. But would you be buying a Chinese Homage watch if you wanted to do that? If you want to check out stuff like this, go on the Watch You Seek forum, where people tech these types of watches, actually diving with them, and you'll be interested to know some of the depths that people get to, and even with like 30-meter water resist Casio watches, and they go diving with them, and obviously it's a study of one, but you can see how dive ratings are massively over egged, really. But anyway, I digress. Yeah, I just thought I'd show you that comparison review of both of them. I'll put them on the wrist just before I finish. They are definitely lookers on the wrist. Definitely lookers. But look how reflective that Pagani is. It's so annoying how the reflections are on there. And but it feels like a beast. The build quality is good on both. So yeah, that little comparison review. Loads more videos coming up. It's been Dave. Have a great day.